It's October. Spooky season has started. September. Let's talk about it. And most importantly, it's time to wake up. Hello and welcome. My name is Pete. This is the Ponderings of Pete. Oh, there's a bookmark in that book. That's interesting. Anyways, welcome to my channel. I really appreciate you coming here. Administrative stuff, like, comment, subscribe, join the Discord, blah, blah, blah. If this is your first time coming, hello and welcome. I'm really glad to have you here. And if this is your second, third, fourth, fifth, 17 billionth, strangely, I don't think anybody's up to that number yet, but maybe, hello again. And thank you also for coming and sticking around despite my weirdness. I don't know. Hard to describe. Today we're going to talk about what I read in September, which, you know, I might not have been posting that many videos or in August and September. I still was reading. And I believe I addressed August in the last wrap up that was July, August. So, yeah, September's what's left. In September, I read 7 books total, roughly. I might just make it 8. How am I doing this? Yeah, I think I'm going to make it 8 because I started one of them in September and finished it in October. So we're just going to talk about those 8 books. Because that's what we're going to do. If you liked any of the books, if you read any of these books, please tell me your thoughts down below and try to be cautious of spoilers of like, hey, just putting the spoiler in the first line. There's the whole thing where you can comment, hit enter a few times, you know, comment spoiler and then blah, 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 blah. And then put the spoiler in. But like, you know, just tell me what you think of the books. If you liked them, if you didn't like them, if you hated them, please tell me why, because that's important because hearing everybody's perspective on why they didn't like books is always interesting to me until it gets old. But that doesn't happen that much because I don't necessarily always engage with toxic fandoms that trash things. But that's just me. Anyways, I'm sure you're probably waiting for the actual content, which is what I read. Starting out with my good friend, buddy, a man I've never met, an author I admire, Brandon Sanderson. I read 2 of his books this month. That would be Alloy of Law and Shadows of Self. Books 1 and 2 in Mistborn Era 2. Or if you want to get technical about it, books 4 and 5 of Mistborn in general. If you don't know what Mistborn is, I don't have any videos actually about Mistborn or Stormlight, which is actually kind of sad. Maybe eventually. But Mistborn Era 2 takes place a couple hundred years after the first era of Mistborn, with Vin and Elend and all these other characters. None of them are around. Well, question mark. That's actually not true, but they're around, some of them are around for reasons that involve immortality. But I can't tell you who, because that would be bad. And spoilery, if you haven't read Mistborn Era 1. There are a lot of references to the events of Mistborn Era 1 within this series, within these 2 books. And that's actually one of the most interesting things about these books is the repercussions and ramifications and implications of the events of Mistborn Era 1 on history going forward. Among other things. This is a lot different from Mistborn Era 1. To also say this is my second time reading this. So I kind of knew what I was getting into. I do like Mistborn Era 2, but for a lot of different reasons that I like, you know, Mistborn or Stormlight Archive, because these are very not serious books, right? Alloy of Law, the first one, was written because Brandon was bored, essentially. I say that, and that's not too far from the truth, because this man writes books when he's bored. He was in the middle of writing Wheel of Time, I believe, finishing it up for Robert Jordan. And his publisher asked him for a short story, and it turned into a novel, which turned into a series, and is now becoming a quartet with the release of Lost Metal this November. So he takes things too far sometimes. What do you expect? Honestly, you're going into Mistborn Era 1, and then you expect the same thing out of Mistborn Era 2? Don't. That's not what it is. It's much less serious. There's some interesting topics that are touched on, but there are also a lot of topics that are just not really explored in depth. We have characters that, you know, we have Wax and Wayne, who were lawmen out in the roughs, the Wild West of equivalent of Scadrial. And then they come back to the city and they have to adjust, and there's adventures and mysteries and crazy new Mistborn powers. Well, not really new. Some of them are new. Some of them are definitely new. Let me rephrase that. There are some new Mistborn powers, and there are also some crossings of the wires, per se. In the Mistborn Era 1, a lot of the powers were you're either a Mistborn or you're a Misting. And Furukumi specifically wasn't explored really in depth, and specifically the intersection of Allomancy and Furukumi was not explored in depth very much because those bloodlines weren't crossed. And now in Mistborn Era 2, we see a lot of that. And it's really cool. Brandon kind of takes his magic system and, levels it up levels it up in one way, but really kind of fills in gaps for everybody in this system. There's a lot of jokes in these books. Shadows of Self, I think the storyline, the plot is a lot better than Alloy of Law. Alloy of Law was not as well thought out, and then Shadows of Self was great. It still wasn't on the level of Mistborn Era 1 with just the amazingness of the plot. But I remember definitely the first time I read it, I was like, oh my gosh, this is great. For me, it did suffer on reread, but I think that's mostly because I've changed as a reader. I'm a lot more analytical as a reader since I read it the first time. And there's things in there that I'm like, you could have done this better, Brandon. And that's pure arrogance on my part. But, whatever. It's just me trying to think I can do things better sometimes. And I probably couldn't, to be honest, because I have to start writing myself first. But it was interesting. This has gone on too long. Did I like them? Yes. Will I read them again? We'll see. But I'm hyped for Lost Metal. And of course, I'm hyped for those implications. Next one, let's talk some Robin Hobb. This month, I didn't really read a full Robin Hobb book, but I did read The Willful Princess and The Piebald Prince, which is a novella that was written after Tanya Man, but by my Hobb mom, Derry. She told me that this was a great time to read it before I get into Tanya Man because it explains some of the backstory behind just the wit and the skill and kind of the stigmatism that goes with the wit, which is one of the magic systems in the Realm of the Elderling series. This was a novella, and it could have been a full-length novel, but she didn't do that, which is fine. It's definitely a sad story because it tells you why people are very much prejudiced against the wit. So I don't think it's a spoiler to say that there's some tragedy here. If you're going to leave the mark of, oh yeah, we're okay with this thing, and now we definitely hate this thing as a national people, there's going to be some crazy stuff that goes down, some crazy bad stuff. And, it's just sad. So this is a good little breather book for Robin Hobb, especially after Ship of Destiny. I'm really looking forward to getting into Fool's Errand sometime in the month of October, which is this month. Next up, we have Terry Pratchett with Going Postal. I loved this book. To me, this book was a lot better than Guards. Personal opinion. Clarifying that because objectivity doesn't exist. A lot of it is because I connected with some of the characters in this book. Not necessarily on a personal level, but I understand where you're coming from, and oh my, that's kind of great. And from a corporate perspective, right? I'm an accountant. I've worked in the corporate world for a few years. I am plugged into the LinkedIn network thing. That's kind of weird to say, but corporate culture is something I am very much familiar with. So a lot of the jokes that Pratchett puts in here are very much familiar to me. And I'm like, yep, yeah. And they're a lot funnier to me because I know how accurate they are to a certain extent. And I know where he's coming from with these jokes. And it's great. So great social commentary that is still relevant today. I'm really excited to read the second one because I've been told by Derry, who loves all things Hobb and Pratchett, that I will really, really like Making Money, which is the second book. Expect to see that one in the next few months as well, because Pratchett is definitely a really good author. Next up, we're going to take a step away from comedy and go into pain and just profound thought, ? Not by me, by Ken Liu, who is really amazing. Paper Menagerie and Other Stories is what I read this month. This was like perfect, especially coming off of the Dandelion Dynasty, which is thick. And like the end of that is just so amazing. Getting little snippets from him, all these short stories really helped me appreciate his writing more, especially listening to people talk about Grace of Kings, thinking back on the entire series and like fitting this in with his whole style, because Grace of Kings kind of does read like a bunch of little short stories. And then seeing where he came from with all these short stories and the amazing things within this book. I can't tell you what my favorite short story is. There's so many good ones. So let's see. I said I couldn't tell you, and maybe I'll look at it. Like, I had so many like little thoughts about these books, because like literally all of them, there's something to think about in there. This is a book of short story collection, kind of sci-fi, kind of fantasy. It kind of doesn't have a specific genre. There's like a random noir sci-fi detective short story in here. Like, there's a little bit of everything. Like, just looking at these, I feel pain and joy in all these things. I really, really liked bookmaking habits of select species, right? I feel like this one is structurally really interesting, as well as like the metaphors in this one are really, really cool. And there's a few of them where like just the way he's structured the actual like the paragraphs and stuff leading into each other and some other stuff that was just like, whoa. So there's actually one that's a short story that kind of switches between two perspectives, and he does it really well. Like, the sentences will match up in a very interesting way, and it's like, wow, that is so cool from a writing perspective. And then also the story just hits you in the feels, and you're like, why do you have to write painful things, Ken Liu? And you might come away being sad or hopeful, or just like sitting there in stunned silence thinking about your life because of this short story. Like state change, that's I think, metaphorically speaking, state change would be my favorite, because there's so much in there to think about. The other thing I really appreciate Ken Liu for everything that he's written, he always injects Chinese history, right? Grace of Kings, there's a lot of Chinese history in there, and then he takes it a different way in the rest of the series. This book, there's actually there's a bunch of the short stories that have to do with specific things in Chinese history. I don't know if you could tell, but I grew up in the West, specifically the Western part of society. I grew up in America. My worldview is very much Western and very much Americanized, where a lot of history, where you have, an emphasis on American history, world history tends to be very Western focused, with bits and pieces of more Eastern history kind of peppered in some places. Even in college, the world history class that I took was very Western focused. Reading Grace of Kings, reading the stories from Paper Menagerie, there's a perspective there that I haven't encountered before. And I appreciate that, because I'm getting more interested in this stuff, and I'm like, okay, cool. Wonder if I could like take a Chinese history course or take an Eastern history course or something along those lines. Because there is history there that's really interesting that I don't know about. Because history can be really, really fascinating sometimes, and can give you ideas for crazy things, because fact is stranger than fiction. I don't know if you knew this. Perspective. A widening perspective is always a good thing, and really just gives me more context for things, which is great. So I can understand things more, which is like my whole life of just like, hey, can I understand this? All right, we got 2 left. Next one. I wouldn't say it's polar opposite of Paper Menagerie, but it's almost, because it's sort of brain fluff, sort of really interesting. This is Voyage of the Basilisk by, I almost said Lady Trent, but it's not. It's by Marie Brennan. It's in the memoirs of Lady Trent. This is about a voyage. Lady Trent going on a voyage. Lady Trent, Jane Austen influenced book series about a dragonologist in a pseudo English world, and then going off on voyages and expeditions to study dragons. It's really interesting. I love it. It's definitely brain fluff and just joy to me. Just it's about essentially a fantasy English woman who gets excited about dragons, and she has a lot of struggles. Some of those struggles involve, getting over gender struggles in her society that is very much still, Jane Austen England. And also, getting over other cultural struggles because she's going to these foreign places and she's understanding the culture and trying to see what she can do. Sometimes to get around it, which is kind of weird, which I'm kind of like uncomfortable about, which sometimes I'm kind of uncomfortable about. She's like, I want to see the dragons, but this is on your sacred place. It's like, She's not as bad as other people, but still sometimes it's kind of like, okay. She does a very good job of integrating with local cultures to the best of her ability so that she is not scrambling slipshod and tracking mud all over everything and just destroying all their sacred traditions and stuff, which is great. She walks the line. I take joy when somebody else is like really nerding out about something, and that's something that she does in these books, and it's great. I enjoy it. And the last one. The final one. I think I've gone through all of them. No, 2 more actually. Guns of the Empire by Django Wexler. So this is Guns of the Empire, 4th book in, what was it called? The Shadow Campaigns. This is a flintlock fantasy series. We got a really intellectual strategist called Janus. Actually, it might be Janus. And saying that really fast, I realize you might not have heard the Y. Janus or Janus. I'm going to call him Janus for the sake of things. Why? Because that just because. So Janus, really smart guy, not the main POV character. That goes to Marcus, Captain Marcus. He's not a captain at this point, as well as Winter, who started out as like a sergeant and then went other places. Did I like this book? Yes. First half of it kind of dragged a little bit, but once you get the halfway point, it kind of picks up and goes different places. Because the first half of it kind of feels like almost a repeat of a bunch of stuff from Price of Valor, or the same vibes, essentially. Once you get the halfway, everything really changes, and a bunch of it, there's a lot of stuff introduced that makes everything different, and it's great. I'm not really a fan of where they ended it, or some of the things that were set up for the final book. And I know Alan from the Library of Alexandria doesn't really like the ending, and if they go where I think they're going with it, like if Django goes the way I think he's going with it, I don't know if I'll like the ending, but we'll see. Overall, definitely fantastic series for the battles, for the strategy, and just, yeah, it's great. He writes battle scenes really well. Check it out if, you think that you'd like that. And the very final one is another short story collection called The Hex Circuit Stories by Yoon-Ha Lee. This is the short story collection that goes with the Machineries of Empire books. So, Machineries of Empire, really good series. Within this collection, there is a novella called Glass Cannon that really extends the timeline, follows up on a bunch of stuff that was kind of left a little open at the end of Machineries of Empire, and I think wraps up in a better way, in any sense. Like the end of Machineries of Empire, the very last book, Revenant Gun, kind of felt like depressing. Kind of felt kind of depressing. Kind of felt like there were people that like weren't in a really good place because of the things that they still had, the burdens that they still had. And Glass Cannon really resolves a lot of those, which was really nice. So fantastic end. Some of them were some of the other short stories were interesting. Some of them were kind of weird. From my impression, they're not all. The rest of the short stories aren't technically like officially canon. So like the author was kind of writing them for like fan fiction in his own universe, which is weird, but they were interesting. Some of them were about culture, some of them about specific series, and they had author notes at the end of all of them, which was actually really interesting. Just hearing the author's thought process throughout all of this. Check out Machineries of Empire, really good series. I will have a review up for it eventually. I got a few that I want to get out. Thank you so much for watching this video. I think I talked about some things a lot longer than others, but thank you for watching. I really appreciate it. Make sure to do all the other things that I said at the beginning of the video. I'm not going to repeat myself. Just make sure to get some rest, because getting rest is super important. And guess what? Our bodies need it. Simple thing, I know, but like, what are you gonna do? Have a great night.